Good morning from California.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Lori. Are you also on the West Coast? I forgot to ask.
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco.
Oh, yay. We're in the same time zone. Uh,
Mhm.
welcome to my live stream. My name is Nancy. I host these amazing guest speakers to help my fellow product managers excel and thrive in their careers. And today we're here to learn from Lorraine to get better at leadership communication, which is one of the most key aspects to the PM role. And Lorraine, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Of course. Well, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Lorraine. I am the founder of Rise Learning Solutions, where I speak, I consult, and I teach ambitious professionals how to supercharge their professional presence. And when I say presence, I mean it in both senses of the word. So I think when people think of presence, they often think of how you're coming across to others, your confidence, charisma, things like that, which is certainly one piece. But the other piece that I talk about is the where. So where are you present? So things like LinkedIn, are you in the right meetings? Are you in the right chat channels? So that's what I'm really passionate about. And I'm really excited to chat with you today, Nancy.
I love the word presence. Also because it's not something that we learn consciously
Hmm.
for most people.
Yeah.
And in this hybrid world, we show up on camera and we
Mhm.
also show up in the office in person.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about if there's any differences in terms of presence in a virtual sense versus an in-person sense?
Yeah, well, definitely there's a difference. I mean, I think foundationally, a lot of the, let's say, characteristics are the same. Like, again, I mentioned you want to show up and be charismatic, you want to be personable, you want to be likable, you want to be competent. So, all these things are very important, no matter which environment you're in. But virtually, there are additional things that you need to consider that I think a lot of people forget. Like, to people, on virtual, they think, okay, as long as I know how to log on to Zoom, or as long as I know how to, mute my microphone, then, I'm good to go. But there's actually a lot of nuances when it comes to communicating virtually that I think a lot of people don't think about. And they're really missing out on this big opportunity to establish their virtual presence because, to your point, most of us are either virtual only or hybrid. So virtual, regardless, is going to be a big part of our daily lives.
I love that you said that. And now I'm curious, in terms of the work you put in for your own presence,
Mhm.
before coming onto this live stream,
Yeah.
steps did you take to work on your presence?
Sure. Well, there are a few key areas that I like to kind of review anytime before I get on a call. So I actually created this framework called the T method. So TEA. So it stands for tech, energy, and aesthetics. And so tech, for example, I make sure I have my microphone, external microphone set up. I make sure I have my webcam set up. I have various software that I use. For
Mhm.
the energy, I'm using a lot of hand gestures to help emphasize my points. When you show your hands on camera as well, you also appear warmer, more energetic, more personable. So a lot of benefits to using your hands on camera and just making sure you have that positive body language. And then there's aesthetics. So not just how you see me, but also how I like feel about myself and how I'm just coming across. So things like my framing, my background, my lighting. So I need to make sure all those things are set up to make sure that I'm making the best impression when I get on camera.
Yes. Enrique chimed in and said presence and mindfulness are so significant as a leader.
Oh, Enrique, I know Enrique. Hi.
I love that. And how do you prepare yourself emotionally and mentally before you turn on the camera?
So I think a lot of it is just making sure that you feel confident. And a lot of that confidence, I have to say, comes from that setup piece. And in particular, the lighting makes a big difference because if you are in a dark room, I mean, you're just not going to feel good. You can kind of, even if it's not, you can't pinpoint it, you're like, oh, I don't look my best. But lighting makes people just naturally look better. So having really great lighting makes a big difference. And then I think having a really, well curated background makes a great difference as well. So if you have a messy bed in the background, or even just a bed period, like those kinds of things, they're just not speaking, they're not just showing that you're professional. So to be able to kind of craft your background. And again, it does not need to be your whole home or your whole apartment. It just needs to be kind of that 6 feet of space behind you that you need to make sure looks professional and make sure
Yeah.
it's giving off the impression that you want it to when you're on camera.
I think this leads to our very first discussion topic for today.
Mhm.
Tell us maybe the top five ish mistakes that leaders make when they're presenting virtually.
Ooh, okay. Top five mistakes. One, I would say eye contact. So when we shake hands in person, the skin to skin contact releases a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a social bonding hormone. When we're virtual, of course, we don't have that, skin to skin contact or the handshake. The next best thing is going to be eye contact. Now, a lot of people, when they are on video calls, they will have their video of the other person here somewhere on their screen, right? So I'm looking down here. Maybe I have a separate monitor. I'm looking over here and I'm talking. And Nancy, I'm sure if I was like this the whole time, you'd be like, what are you looking at, Lorraine? Like I'm over here, right? So eye contact makes a big difference in making people feel connected. So you want to look, depending on your setup, either at your camera or right below your camera. The second thing I would say is framing. So
Sorry,
again,
one second on the eye contact
yeah,
thing. It's so hard for me because I want to look at you.
yeah,
But in order to establish eye contact, I'm not looking at you right now. I'm looking at
exactly.
the top of my
So
monitor, and that is so hard for me. And but I occasionally I want to look at you, but when I look at you, I'm not looking at the camera anymore.
yeah, that's a really hard one to get used to. And it took me a while too, but once you practice, it actually becomes very difficult to not look at the camera. So maybe just a few more LinkedIn lives and you'll be like, oh, I don't even need to look over. But there's a few hacks you can do to help with that. So
Love
one
hacks.
is, yeah, one is you can move like my screen right to the top of your monitor, right underneath the camera. So you can kind of
Yes,
peripheral vision, see me a little bit.
yes.
I actually use this new, not new, but this new piece of hardware called PlexiCam. So I can actually share a link with you all afterwards with a special discount code. But PlexiCam essentially allows my camera to sit on top of this like piece of thick plastic. And then there's this, I don't know how quite to explain it, but there's like a piece of plastic that goes over your video right now. So like I'm looking at you and my camera's right above it.
Oh
So
my
just
God.
so I can like see you and talk to you and see your expression so it feels more natural. But the camera is still like right above you. So a little bit more eye contact.
Yes, please share the link with us. I'm
Yeah.
dying to check it out. I was looking at this one camera, forgot what it's called, but it's tiny and it's meant to be put in the middle of the monitor, right next to the person you're talking to, and then you can
Oh.
move it around.
Yeah, it's probably like, yeah, there's lots of different kind of, which is great, inventions like that now that are making it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I love it. We have a couple of live audiences chiming in. Angie,
Oh, hi, Angie. Hey, Angie's great. We met the other day.
nice to meet you, Angie. How do we not talk about these communication tips on our call?
We had too many things to discuss. So yeah, for
Yes.
the next call.
And back to you, Lorraine. So sorry I cut you off. What was the second mistake
Oh
that
yeah.
leaders make?
So the second one I would say is framing. So your framing is looking good, Nancy, but like a lot of people will have their camera too high up or too down low, especially if they're using just their laptop, like they're looking
Laptop,
down
yeah.
like this. Yeah. So you want your framing, you want just a few fingers worth of space above your head. So you can maybe even move your camera a little bit farther down, but you essentially want to
Sit
take
up.
up like as much of the screen as you can, right? Because I mean, it's a small space and we want to physically have our presence. Yeah. Have our presence there. So having that space and then also like showing a little bit of your torso so that again, you can kind of have your hands up on screen and it feels a little bit more natural, like a little bit more like we're talking like in person, right? If it was just my big head, on the camera, it's very clear it's a video call, but this way it's like a little bit more of our bodies, a little bit more natural. So that's a really good thing as well.
What do you think of instead of sitting in your
Yeah.
meeting?
So anytime I present or do like a keynote or a webinar, I stand because standing does give you more energy.
Yeah.
I used to stand on all my meetings too. I think sitting is fine. It's a little bit more, um, like casual, I guess, like not like so formal, like I'm standing to talk to you. But I'm in my chair and chatting with you. The one thing about it is if you do choose to sit, is to make sure you have good posture and you're still having that energy, right? Like when we're in our chairs, it's very nice to kind of like relax and lean back. So a good tip for this is to scoot up on your chair, sit on the kind of the edge, and you're not gonna be able to really lean back. You have to really
Yes,
sit
I
straight.
have that problem. I always slouch.
I mean, it's hard, like we're in a chair all day, right? Sitting at the computer, so it's natural.
Very, very good point. I need to hold myself accountable for that. I will
Mhm.
remember this three-finger rule of
Yeah,
thumb. Very helpful
it's
because I'm
helpful.
always kind of lower down in the frame because I'm slouching.
Yeah, I could
And
do like slowly.
as the day, yes, as the day go on, I'm just lower, lower,
Okay.
lower. Great point. We have a comment from Philip.
Mm.
Hi, Philip.
Hi,
Is
Philip.
it necessary to always turn on your camera, even if your
Mm.
boss's cameras are off? Great question.
Yeah, I love that question. I would say yes, because for a few reasons. So especially if your company is always virtual, but even if you're hybrid, you only have so many touch points in a given day to speak to your bosses. And so you don't want that to let that opportunity go to waste, right? Like you want them to see your face, even if their cameras are off. It's much easier to talk to this moving face, right? Than just your name on the screen or even your profile picture. At the very least, upload a profile picture to your video platform of choice. I think that's, always a good thing to have, especially if your camera's off. But when you can, turning on your camera, I think goes a long way. Even I know it's kind of uncomfortable and kind of weird if the other person's camera is off, but I mean, you get the benefit. They get to see you, they get to feel like they know you a little bit better.
I get this a lot when
Mhm.
let's say the meeting happens during someone's lunch hour.
Mm,
Uh, with time zone differences, that could vary
yeah.
depending on who you're meeting. And a lot of people will say, I'm taking my lunch, so I'm just
Right.
trying to
Yeah.
turn on my camera. Do you see a difference when people are eating on the screen, or in that case, should the camera be off?
I think that makes sense to have the camera off. I mean, I personally would not want someone watching me eat. But yeah, I think hopefully there's other meetings that you're having with this person so you can still see them and it's not just during their mealtime. If it's just during mealtime and you don't have a chance to see your colleagues otherwise, I would recommend doing maybe some recorded videos every now and then just so they, get reminded of your voice and your facial expressions and things like that and see your smile, for example. So yeah.
Great point. Okay, back to you.
Yeah.
What is the top third mistake? Let's
Third,
say.
I would say is the energy they bring on calls. So I talked about the hand gestures before, so that's a great thing to incorporate. The other thing I would say regarding energy is that a lot of people, when they join calls, because we have so many calls in a day, we are just on autopilot. So we have the very, typical conversations that we can predict with pretty much anyone. So it's, how are you, Nancy? I'm great. How are you doing? I'm great. And then we just kind of get into it, right? But that's not us connecting at all, really, or like really sharing how we feel. So, starting off with that, asking how the person is, that's totally fine. You might answer a different way, like, oh, Lorraine, I'm wonderful. Like, I just went on my daily walk and listened to my favorite podcast, right? And then that gives me something to go off of, like, oh, you really like walks? Or like, oh, I've heard of that podcast, or oh, tell me more about that podcast. So
Yeah.
I'm learning a little bit about you. I'm making a connection, and I'm just breaking up the monotony of our calls. So I think anytime you can incorporate kind of interesting questions like that or offer up interesting information beyond the generic, I'm good, how are you? I'm good too, goes a long way in making those connections.
What if, let's say, we have back to back to back Zoom calls and we are drained
Mhm.
because Zoom fatigue is real?
Yeah.
What are some of your hacks to get your energy up high again?
Mhm. Yeah, so Zoom fatigue, I think so I always like to say this, like, I don't think video is the problem. I think the problem is bad meetings and too many meetings. So, like, if we still had meetings during the day, but like the same number, but they were all really productive and really engaging and really interesting, like Zoom fatigue would not be nearly, as big of an issue.
Mhm.
So there's a few things you can do. I mean, turn off self view. That helps a lot. So you don't have that mirror effect where you're just looking at yourself the whole time. So that helps a lot. And then I think making sure that your meetings, I always like to say, end them 5 minutes before whatever the half hour or 10 minutes before the hour. I think your teammates will really appreciate that. And you really need that reset time, as you
Yes.
said, because the context switching and the jumping from meeting to meeting, you're just not getting the best version of your team. So whenever I schedule meetings, it's always, 25 minutes, 15 minutes, 50 or 55 minutes.
I I learned a reverse hack to that
Mhm.
because I find it harder for me to end early, but
Start
if
later.
I start later,
Yeah,
I feel
that's
like
a
I
good idea.
have a lot more control.
Yeah.
And to simulate hallway conversation,
Mhm.
actually, if I can,
Yeah.
I join the meeting on time instead of what the calendar says, which is 5 minutes
Mhm.
after.
Yeah.
And then slowly it built this habit
Yeah.
that other people might also join because that's our
Yeah.
hallway conversation time.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I've heard other people do that as well. I think that's a great, approach.
Love it. Any other mistakes that you think are very common that we make when we're presenting?
Um, yeah, there's a long list. I mean, I could keep going. I don't know if you want me to, or
Maybe
we can
just
go.
one more and then we can move on to the second topic.
Okay. Um, I would say, okay, so some kind of similar to kind of the background piece. So I have these visuals up on screen in front of me. So I actually don't just say curate your background. I actually like to say curate your whole environment. So there's
Mhm.
a lot of really kind of more engaging ways to make yourself stand out on camera. And so, there's a lot of tools out there that allow you to do this. Like I'm using Prezi Video. There's also Warmly on Zoom, for example. So a
What
lot
was
of great, yeah, Prezi and Warmly. And so
warmly?
there's a lot of really great ways that you can kind of enhance the foreground of your video to make yourself stand out, differentiate yourself. So I think that's another kind of less conventional tip, but one that I like to share.
I'm dying to check out these links now. Okay, we have Ariba chiming in. Hi. How important is it to make small talk before kicking off a meeting?
I think the small talk is important, but you don't always need to have small talk. So
Mm.
I created something called a lot of frameworks today, passive to active meeting framework. And it's basically a few simple steps for how to lead a really engaging meeting. And the first step, Ariba, is warm up. And warm up can be some small talk, but actually, whenever I led a team meeting, I would do some sort of activity. So there might be a little bit small talk, but really, like we just jump into the activity because it just gives something a little bit more exciting for people to kind of latch onto. So it could be, okay, what is the question? As I would offer, okay, this is the question of the week. Everyone takes turns answering. Or I would do like a team meditation, for example.
I
I
love
would
it.
do, sometimes I would have a teammate, like if they had a hobby they were passionate about, they talk about it for 5 minutes. So I don't think small talk is necessarily always necessary. I think small talk, as I said before, I like to say turning small talk into big talk by turning off autopilot. So that tip I shared before can kind of transform it into something a little bit less boring. And then all those other ideas, as I mentioned as well, to warm up a meeting are all really critical to just starting off the meeting on the right foot and with the right energy.
I love that. Moving on to our second topic for today's live stream, how to craft and deliver messages that resonate with diverse teams, stakeholders, and leadership teams. And this question is very relevant for product managers because
Mm,
we're working with all kinds of cross-functional
yeah.
partners. So how do we craft and deliver our messages?
So the first thing I would say, and to your point, like product managers have a lot of different stakeholders. So the first thing I would say is just to make sure that you're understanding who your audience is. We all have things that we want to get across. We have our own goals, right? But if we really want to inspire people to make change or we want to get buy-in, we really need to understand, what's important to our audience, what are their goals, how are they being evaluated, and really what's important to them. When I talk about presenting to audiences, different audiences, another framework, something called the Think, Do, Feel Matrix. And this is something, the Think, Do Matrix was created by this professor named Andrew Abella, and it was modified by my former colleague, Spencer Waldron, to add that feel part. And so this is a really great framework to follow when you're speaking to different audiences. So what you do is, so you have think, do, feel, and you have now, and you have after. So what does your audience currently think? What are they currently doing? How do they currently feel about whatever it is, the topic that you're speaking on? And then how do you want all these things to change after you talk to them? And so this is a really good strategy just to make sure you really understand kind of how your audience thinks and again, what they're doing, what they're feeling, but you just learn more about them and it helps you kind of develop your messaging, your communication to make sure that you get the end result that you want.
You mentioned this framework is called the Think, Do, and Feel framework. And then you mentioned in the previous question another framework on how to start meeting. Did you say it was, what was it called again? Passive
to active meeting framework.
passive to active. Is there a list of your favorite frameworks that we can find on your website or on your LinkedIn somewhere?
Yeah, so not all of these are on my website, but a good number are. So lorraineklee.com/free-resources, I think it is. Or you can just go to lorraineklee.com and you'll see the tab for free resources.
Oh,
And you can download some of those. Yeah.
I love that. Is that where the QR code takes us to your
That's
website?
actually to my newsletter, but it'll go to my website. So yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Product managers love frameworks. Anything else that you could add when it comes to crafting or delivering? And I guess it's two separate things. Crafting the message versus delivering it. Is there a difference?
Yeah, so I guess the Think, Do, Feel matrix would be more on the crafting side. Delivering message, I think it's really critical to understand how your audience likes to receive information. So, there are people who really love getting emails for longer, pieces of information. Some people prefer chat. Some people are more introverted and they want to see it written down before having to, respond in real time if you jump on a call with them. So I think understanding people's preferred communication methods can go a really long way to, again, make sure it's like received in the best way possible.
Is this something that you coach people on rather than providing a course or a program? Do you have services where you support people on the day-to-day in terms of their leadership and communication style?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I mean, I love talking about these things. I think there's so many nuances to communication. And like I said, like to your presence, right? There's like so many things that can fall within that. So yes, it is definitely something I love to help people with.
I love that. Moving on to our third question, methods to establish credibility. Oh, I love that question. And foster trust within your team and across the organization. And I want to zoom in on the word credibility here. What can you tell us about establishing trust and credibility?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love talking about credibility and trust because it's become a very big challenge, especially with remote and distributed teams. So three things come to mind. So the first one, just simply being reliable. And I know that sounds really, really just easy and kind of simplistic, but I mean, it's quite hard actually to find reliable coworkers, people who will do what they say they will do, like when they say that they will do it. So simply being someone that people can trust and know if you say, okay, Nancy, I'm going to get this to you by Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, I'm going to get it to you and at 3 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday, right? So it sounds simple again, but so many people do not do this. And of course, like if deadlines need to change, which happens, being proactive, giving that update, and just again, open lines of communication.
Right.
So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second is asking for feedback. So showing that you are someone who wants to learn, someone who can take feedback well. Again, another hard skill, sounds easy. It is not. That's also really important in making people realize, okay, this person like listens to me. They are open. They are willing to learn. Like egos are not getting in the way. That is going to be really important to your growth and establishing that connection and being, again, someone that people can trust. The third one I would say is just building relationships,
Mhm.
not just meeting because you need something from them, but actually, getting to know them as people. And I think people just naturally, when your relationships are stronger, people trust you more. They view you as more credible. They know you as a person, right? They know what you're about. So those are the first three things that immediately come to mind when I think about
I love
credibility and
that.
trust.
I get this question a lot, which is during onboarding.
Hmm.
And product managers are most likely 99% of the time high achievers,
Hmm.
or they have the desire to onboard ASAP and establish credibility and trust ASAP.
Hmm.
Do you
Hmm.
have tips for us during onboarding timeframe? Are there things that we should definitely do
Hmm.
in the first 30 days versus, let's say, 90 days?
Yeah, well, you kind of touched on it. I feel like a 30, 60, 90 document is always a good idea. I think it shows that you're proactive. And then also, it's really good to get that buy in or that agreement or any adjustments needed from your manager. So that's one thing I would say is really, really great. And then also, just making sure to meet with different stakeholders who you're going to have to work with. And yeah, just asking a lot of questions, showing interest.
Yeah.
Don't feel, I know it's harder, easier said than done, but uh, don't try to feel like you need to deliver something right away. Like just be open to the learning at the beginning. That's the best time to really soak it all in and ask all the questions.
I love that you mentioned don't rush into delivering something because most of us would think that when we don't deliver, then we
Hmm.
don't establish credibility. But it sounds like just by showing up
Hmm.
and being proactive, we're also showing credibility. It's not
Yeah.
just solely dependent on delivering something
Hmm.
ASAP. Can you tell us a little bit more about? I feel like it's a little bit of a mindset shift
Hmm.
where people want to solve all the problems ASAP, and we think that if we're just asking a bunch of questions,
Yeah.
that doesn't really help us be
Yeah.
credible.
So, I think that's where the 30, 60, 90 is super helpful because if you have the 30 days, your 30-day plan to meet with, X number of people across, these functions and really like to learn, like you just have like learning objectives in those first 30 days and your manager signs off on it. I mean, that's something you can directly point to and say, I mean, this is the plan, right? And I would hope that your manager is open to you doing that and not expecting you to just hit the ground running and deliver something. And especially to your point, like product managers, you want to deliver a product. So I think having that kind of written down in stone, having your goals is super helpful. And I think the mindset shift, like just think about, I mean, you just have to think about it holistically. Like you cannot start running before you have all the information or before you learn how to walk, right? And just think about um, kind of gathering that information as giving you the skills to walk. And then once you have that, then you can run. But you can't just show up as a
Right.
baby at the company and crawl and then jump to running, right? You need that step in between.
Yes, makes so much sense. Now, what happens when, let's say, we onboarded and we're a year or two into the company and
Mhm.
we make a really big mistake? How do we rebuild that trust and rebuild that credibility?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is to not dwell in the mistake as high achievers. And I have that mentality as well. It can be easy to dwell on our mistakes and be like, oh my gosh, like this is the worst thing. Like, what's going to happen to my career? So
Yeah.
try not to dwell in it, accept responsibility. And then it's very important to have, again, those open lines of communication. Whoever your stakeholders are, whoever is kind of the executive sponsor, the executive that's overseeing this, make it really clear, what the mistake is, have a game plan for how you're going to solve it, and
Mhm.
then keep open your lines of communication. So let them know how and where and when they can reach you. I think that is a very, very solid way to start rebuilding that credibility and showing that you're proactive and not just letting the mistake happen to you, but just really being proactive and trying to solve it.
Is this where we apologize? I was recently just thinking about this topic. I don't really remember in just years of working that
Yeah.
people ever really apologize for anything. Is that a
Huh.
thing that we need to be more conscious of, or we don't really need to do that? We just say,
Yeah.
this is a learning opportunity and this is
Yeah.
how we grow from it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if a sorry is necessary. I think if it's something that you actually have to be sorry for, you say sorry like you offend someone or something like that.
Yeah.
When it comes to a work mistake, it's a good question. And when it comes to a work mistake, I might say, like, I apologize, maybe. I feel like
Mm,
sorry maybe sounds like on a more personal level, but you know, I have, or like I take ownership. There's different ways you can kind of phrase it. I take ownership for missing that.
yeah,
Here's my solution for fixing it. Yeah, so I think maybe you want to show accountability and show regret and not just blow past it. I don't know if you necessarily need the phrase "I'm sorry."
yeah, that's fair. I
Yeah.
feel like because the fear of failure, when we make mistakes, and we all make mistakes, it's not really normalized in
Yeah.
the work setting. And
Yeah.
I was just thinking, if it's normalized, that
Mhm.
it wouldn't be such a big deal to
Mhm.
admit that this could have done better.
Yeah.
I made a mistake. But maybe we're all evolving, so hopefully it will be more normalized in the future.
Yeah, it's hard. I feel like a lot of companies say they have this learning culture and they embrace mistakes, but you really need to model it from the top down for people to really believe that.
Yeah,
And I think, again, it's the mindset shift, as you said.
right,
Like mistakes are ways to learn.
right.
Like, if we never made any mistakes at all, I mean, the job is probably maybe too easy for us. And like, there's just, of course, there's careless mistakes, but like mistakes come because we are learning something new or maybe trying something new. And so that's where we see the most growth, right? From learning about things that maybe didn't work out. So I always like to kind of frame it that way.
I love that. Moving on to our fourth topic and the last topic of today's live stream.
Mhm.
Understand how effective leadership communication contributes to your personal brand as a leader in product management or in all roles.
Mhm.
What does effective leadership communication mean, and how does that affect our personal brand?
Mhm. So I love that you're asking about personal brands. I am a huge proponent of LinkedIn, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I worked there for 6 years. I was a founding editor on that team, so I just love the platform, love what it can do for your personal
Mhm.
brand. And of course, within a company, you also have your career brand, and these two things align, very closely, or are the same thing. So I would say, communication is such a foundational skill to the workplace. Like if you can communicate well, just so many other things fall into place. And if you can communicate well, that is part of your career brand, right? Like that's how people see you and that's part of your presence. Like that's why I like to talk about presence because you want people to see you a certain way. And now I would say, when it comes to personal brand, it's not just about your career brand within a company, but it's really about where are people seeing you. And LinkedIn has really become not just the job search site, but your virtual office. And you want to be seen in the virtual office. When you can be seen well in the virtual office, it does actually impact your career brand or personal brand within a company. And so I always love telling people like get on LinkedIn, make sure you have a mission statement, your profile's filled out, you are sharing content, you're sharing ideas, thought leadership. All of these things will positively impact how you are being seen in your company. And, I'm a great example of that. When I worked at the last company I was at, I was big on LinkedIn. And I started posting about how I was doing more speaking engagements. And then I would get more speaking engagements and more podcasts and LinkedIn Lives with people like you. And I would talk about the product and the company I was at. So it was like this
Ah,
natural partnership and natural brand marketing and organic brand marketing and positive, brand awareness for the company I was working at. So these two things can tie really well closely together. You don't have to be on LinkedIn just because you are looking for a new job, but it really can enhance your role and your presence and your reputation at the company you're already at.
I love that. And I get the flip side of that question all the time, which is, but what would my manager think?
Yeah.
What would my coworkers think? I
Yeah.
have to watch what I say.
Mm-hmm.
That's part one of the struggle. And part two is if I become more active on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
they might think I'm goofing off at work, or they might think
Yeah.
my focus is
Yeah.
on building my own personal brand.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard both things. To your first point, yeah, it's a little bit it's gonna probably be a little bit uncomfortable to start, like, even me having worked at LinkedIn, anytime I was getting ready to post, I'd be like, "Ooh, like, do I sound smart?" Like, like, you just get nervous, it's tied to your professional identity, so, that just takes kind of practice and pushing through, and maybe you get, like, a group of people to kind of review your posts ahead of time if you're feeling nervous, that can be a great way to feel more comfortable, or, you do something like starting commenting, instead of making your own posts. I always like to say commenting is a kind of more low pressure way to kind of get your voice and your name out there without necessarily having the big posts from your name. To your other point, yeah, it's really tough. Like when employers are not supportive, and there are things you can do. Like I mean, I think the forward-thinking companies do understand the benefit of having your employees on LinkedIn. If your company is a little bit reticent or just unsure, your manager's not sure, I think it's kind of like creating a business plan for it, right? Like these are the reasons why I think it could benefit the company. These are people I've spoken to who have seen, positive impacts. People who have worked at similar companies who are in similar roles. So I think creating some sort of plan like that, if it's something important that you want to do, can be a way to kind of break through that sort of stereotype that your employer might have, like, oh, you're not paying attention at work. It's like, no, this is actually in addition to my work, I'm making my work better and making all our work more visible.
Right. I have a tactical tip, which is, of course, we don't want to overwhelm anyone, certainly not ourselves and not our nervous system, because a lot of the worry and anxiety is likely not true. Right? We don't know if our managers will be bothered by it.
Yeah.
We don't know how our coworkers think, but we assume a bunch of things. So that's one element and one dimension to just recognize that a lot of it is coming from within.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
the
point.
second part is to manage our own nervous system.
Mhm.
We could kind of feel out the right cadence. So maybe posting every day is really too much.
That's
What
an
about
aggressive part, yeah.
once a week? Is that too much for the manager? Is that too much for their coworkers?
Mhm.
And if so, what about every other week?
Mhm.
So there has to be a natural point where we're not, we're not everywhere,
Mhm.
right? And we could still make steps and take steps toward building a personal brand. So
Yeah.
just tactically, that would be two tips I have for anyone that might find this useful.
Yeah, those were great. Yeah, similarly, I like to say when it feels overwhelming,
Yeah.
set the bar super low, like post once a month. Like you can do
Right.
that, and then
Yeah.
just slowly build.
Yeah. And I was recently on listening to a podcast and they were saying it's kind of like leaving a legacy
Mm.
behind. And sometimes I go back to my old posts and it's like, oh yeah, I wrote about that. Like I have
Yeah.
forgotten all about it already. And
Mhm.
that framing helps me with my consistency and it helps me show up even when
Yeah.
I feel like I don't have anything else to say. So the framing and the positioning of legacy works for me and resonates
Yeah.
with me. I
Mm.
would pick another value that you would
Mm.
resonate with and anchor on that one.
Yeah, that's really nice.
All right. Any parting thoughts for people who are tuning in that you have for us?
I would just say that, yeah, presence. I mean, that's what I talk about, right? Supercharging your professional presence and just to really invest in it. this, 2024, invest in it this year. It is going to help you whether you stay at your company, whether you decide to leave, whether you decide to do something on your own. So just investing in all these different aspects will go a long way. And I'm just super excited for all of you to get started.
Love that. And we have one final comment from the audience. Hi, Michael. Thanks for chiming in. When posting on LinkedIn, focus on material content that relates to your job. Yes. Tie it to the learning objectives, which should be part of your annual work goals, training, and education. I love
Nice.
it.
Love
And
that.
that's
Yeah.
a great way to wrap up this conversation. Very tactical and hopefully not too overwhelming for everyone to take their first step and work up that courage to show up more. Thank you so much, Lorraine.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.